Welcome to Talk Treatises. Today, we are opening the dusty covers of history to tackle a question that I think, well, if we're being honest, has crossed everyone's mind at least once.
Oh, for sure.
It's a guilty thought, maybe, like a shadow in the back of the political brain, but it's definitely there. And the question is this. If we could guarantee, absolutely, 100% guarantee, that a dictator was perfectly virtuous, insanely intelligent, and completely benevolent, would that actually be the best form of government?
It is the great seduction of the good despot. It's such a common sentiment, historically and even now.
Right.
You look at the gridlock of democracy, the bickering, the inefficiency, the noise of it all, and you can't help but think, if just one smart person could cut through the red tape and fix it, wouldn't we all be better off?
Exactly. It appeals to our desire for order, for clarity. We see the messiness of Parliament or Congress, and we crave the clean efficiency of a CEO or a commander.
But the work we're covering today, it takes that very appealing idea, holds it up to the light, and just absolutely smashes it.
Smashes it is the right word, because the author argues something that feels so counterintuitive. He argues that a good despot is actually more harmful to a nation than a bad one.
Which is a staggering claim if you really stop and think about it.
It is.
We usually assume a bad despot is the worst case scenario. They hurt your body, they take your money, obvious tangible harm.
But a good despot.
A good despot, according to this argument, rots your soul. It fosters passivity. It encourages mental laziness. It creates a nation of giant infants who look to the state for everything.
And that leads to what?
Inevitable mental stagnation. And eventually the collapse of that civilization because no one is thinking for themselves anymore. The active, creative spirit has been extinguished.
What a hot take for the 1860s. So today we are doing a deep dive into Considerations on Representative Government by John Stuart Mill. This was published in 1861, and it is a beast of a text.
It really is.
It's not just some dry manual on how to vote or run an election. It is a profound exploration of human character and how our institutions shape who we are.
And to really understand Mill here, you have to get the mood of 1861. It was a time of really serious debate about parliamentary reform in Britain. The American Civil War was just breaking out across the ocean, which was this huge test for democratic ideas.
A test that seemed to be failing at the time.
Exactly. But Mill noticed something interesting in his own country. He felt that both the main parties, the liberals and the conservatives, had sort of lost faith in their own creeds. They were just going through the motions.
Running on autopilot.
That's the perfect phrase. They were shouting the old slogans, but they'd forgotten the philosophy behind them. The why.
They were treating politics like a sport. My team versus your team.
Precisely. Rather than as a science or a philosophy. So Mill steps in, not really to pick a side, but to try and synthesize, to bring two big ideas together.
What were those ideas?
He was trying to combine two warring schools of thought that were dominating the intellectual landscape at the time. You had the people who think government is an invention, like a machine you build.
Okay, the engineers.
Right. And then you had the people who think government is like a tree, something that grows organically from history and tradition.
The gardeners.
The gardeners, exactly. And Mill is trying to be both.
We're definitely going to get into that machine versus tree debate in a moment because it's absolutely crucial to his whole project. But first, let's establish the stakes. Why did he write this? Mill isn't just trying to figure out how to count votes more efficiently.
No, he has a much, much higher purpose for this book.
Which is?
His mission is incredibly ambitious.
Okay.
He argues that the ideal government has two jobs. One is the obvious one, manage public business efficiently.
Right. Fix the roads, defend the borders, settle disputes, the basics.
All that. But the second job, and he thinks this is by far the more important one, is that the government must act as an agency of national education.
National education, like it should run schools.
More than that. The very structure of the government, the act of participating in it, exists to improve the character of its citizens.
That is a fascinating metric for success. Not, is the economy growing or are we conquering our neighbors, but are the people becoming smarter and better human beings?
Right. That's the ultimate test for Mill. If the government makes its citizens passive or stupid or selfish, then it is a bad government, no matter how efficiently the trains run on time.
Okay, so that sets the stage perfectly. Let's unpack this. Part one of our journey today is the nature of political institutions. And as you said, Mill starts by dissecting this huge debate between the mechanical view and the organic view. Could you break those down for us? Because they really define how we think about politics even today.
They absolutely do. So the mechanical view is the engineer's perspective, as you put it. It views government as a practical art.
A tool.
A tool, exactly. To these thinkers, a constitution is like a steam plow or a threshing machine. It's a piece of technology invented to solve a specific problem.
So, for example, we have a problem with tyranny, so let's invent a tool called a republic to fix it. Or we have a problem with corruption, so let's invent this tool called a separation of powers.
Precisely. And the logic that follows is, if you find a better tool, say, you think a democracy is a better machine than a monarchy, you should just swap it out. It doesn't matter what the country's history or tradition is.
It's a plug-and-play model of government.
It is. The idea is that if the steam plow works wonders in England, well, it should work just as well in India. If a Republican constitution works in America, it should work in France. The context is secondary to the quality of the machine.
Which sounds very logical to the modern ear. I mean, we love efficiency, we love technology. But who is on the other side of that argument?
The other side held the organic view. This was often the position of the conservatives of the era, thinkers in the tradition of Edmund Burke.
And their analogy was the tree.
The tree? They say institutions are not made, they grow. You can't just take a British constitution, which grew over 1,000 years of specific history and culture, and plant it in a different country with different soil and expect it to survive.
So for them, it's all about national habits, instincts, tradition.
All the unconscious wants and needs of a people. They would argue that you can't just invent a government any more than you can sit down and invent a fully grown oak tree. It has to have deep, complex roots in the past.
So you have the engineers versus the gardeners. And Mill, being Mill, comes in and says what?
He says they're both wrong. Or rather, they're both half right, which is his classic move. He wants to synthesize them.
How does he do that?
He says, look, institutions are made by men. They don't just spring up from the ground. You don't wake up one summer morning and find a parliament growing in the garden next to the roses.
That's a good point.
It takes human will. It takes choice. It takes design. In that sense, government is a machine. We build it.
But there's always a but.
But, like any machine, it needs the right operators and the right conditions. You can invent the most brilliant steam plow in the world, but if the people you give it to don't know how to use it, or they hate steam plows on principle, or they're terrified of steam engines,
it's useless. It'll just rust in the field.
It will rust in the field. The machine is only as good as the people's willingness and ability to work it.
So this is where he lays out his 3 specific conditions for any form of government to actually work. And I love how practical this is. It's not just high-flown theory. It's a checklist for nation builders.
It really is. It's a checklist for political survival. He says, first, the people must be willing to accept it.
Condition 1, acceptance.
It seems incredibly obvious, but you look at history and it's just littered with regimes imposed on people who simply didn't want them.
Right. If the people deeply desire a theocracy and you try to give them a hyper-modern secular democracy, they're probably going to reject it at the first opportunity.
They're going to fight it every step of the way. So that's the first hurdle. The second is that they must be willing to do what is necessary to preserve it.
What does that mean in practice?
It means they have to be willing to fight for it, to pay taxes for it, to defend it against threats, both foreign and domestic. If the people are apathetic or indifferent to the survival of their own government, it will fall.
It can't be defended by just a handful of officials. The people have to be invested.
Deeply invested.
Oh.
And the third condition is the most demanding of all. They must be willing to fulfill the duties and discharge the functions which it requires of them.
So you can't just accept it and defend it. You have to actively participate.
You have to do the work. If a representative government requires you to serve on a jury and nobody shows up, the entire justice system fails. If it requires you to vote intelligently and conscientiously, and you just sell your vote to the highest bidder or vote based on a whim,
the system rots from the inside out.
It rots. So you can't force freedom or particular type of government on a people who aren't willing or able to put in the work. The character of the people is the ultimate determining factor.
This leads him directly to his criterion of good government. And this is where he attacks that standard age-old political dichotomy of order versus progress. We hear this all the time, right? The candidate of order versus the candidate of change. The conservative versus the progressive.
Mill finds that dichotomy completely unscientific. It just drives him crazy. He sees it as lazy thinking. He argues that order is simply the preservation of existing good, and progress is the increase of that good. They aren't opposites.
They're two sides of the same coin.
Even closer than that. He says they are manifestations of the same human qualities. Industry, integrity, courage, intelligence, just applied differently. To create progress, you need those qualities. To preserve order, you need those same qualities.
So you can't have one without the other.
No, not really. You can't have real progress without order. Because if you don't preserve what you've already gained, you aren't progressing, you're just churning. You're taking one step forward and one step back.
And the other way around.
If you have order without progress, you are just preserving a corpse. It's stagnation. The society might be stable, but it's dead.
So if we can't use the old order versus progress metric, how do we test if a government is actually good?
Mill proposes a twofold test. It's his new criterion. First, there's the administrative test. It's a question of mechanics.
Okay.
The question is, how well does the government organize the existing merit and intelligence of society to handle public business?
So basically, are the trains running on time? Is the trash being picked up? Are the courts functioning fairly? Is the government competent with the raw material, the people that it currently has?
Correct. It's a measure of present efficiency. But the second test is the one he weighs much more heavily. And this goes right back to his core mission statement.
The educational function.
Exactly. The second more important question is, how much does the government improve the mental, moral, and active qualities of the people themselves?
Does the government make you a better person? That is such a high bar. I can't imagine any modern politician running on that platform. Vote for me, I'll improve your moral character.
It is an incredibly high bar. But for Mill, that is the whole point.
Right.
And that leads us directly into his passionate defense of representative government. He believes it is the only form of government that has a chance of passing that difficult second test.
And this brings us to what I found to be one of the most compelling parts of the entire text. It's his psychological argument. Mill distinguishes between two fundamental character types, the active and the passive.
This is absolutely crucial to his entire worldview. The passive character is submissive, enduring, patient, is the person who accepts their lot in life, bows to authority, and just tries to stay out of trouble.
The person who says, well, what can you do? And just keeps their head down.
That's them. The person who endures hardship rather than fighting against it. And then you have the active character. This is the person who is struggling, shaping their circumstances, refusing to just accept the status quo.
The innovator, the reformer, the person who sees a problem and tries to fix it.
Exactly. And Mill points out that for centuries, most moralists and most religions have praised the passive character.
Turn the other cheek. Obey thy master. Blessed are the meek.
All of that. And despots, of course, love the passive character. They adore them because they're easy to control. A nation of sheep is a dictator's dream.
If everyone just wants to be left alone to farm their little turnip patch, the despot can do whatever he wants without any pushback.
Total freedom of action for the ruler. But, and this is Mill's great assertion, all human advancement, every single bit of it, comes from the active type.
Every invention, every reform, every work of art, every step away from the cave.
All of it comes entirely from the active type. If everyone throughout history had been passive, we'd still be in the Stone Age, patiently enduring the cold.
So here's the link to government. Despotism, by its very nature, demands and encourages passivity in order to survive.
It has to. An active questioning populace is a threat to absolute rule. But a free, representative government demands activity.
And not only demands it, but creates it. This is the feedback loop, isn't it?
It's the whole engine of his theory. Mill argues that political participation is a school, a gymnasium for the mind. He uses the example of the ancient Athenians.
Right, he makes this incredible claim that an average Athenian citizen was arguably more intellectually developed than an average modern Englishman of his time.
A claim that would have shocked his readers.
So why? Was it because they read more books or had better schools?
No. It was because the Athenian was constantly actively engaged in the life of the city. He was serving on juries, the dicastery, and debating in the public assembly, the ecclesia.
He wasn't just watching politics on the news, he was doing politics.
He was doing it. He had to listen to complex arguments from orators like Pericles. He had to weigh evidence in a court case. He had to make decisions that affected the entire city, not just himself. He had to think about war and taxes and foreign policy.
He was forced to think about things bigger than his own breakfast.
Precisely. And Mill then paints this really scathing portrait of the private citizen under a despotism, even a benevolent one. What does that person care about?
His family, his money.
That's it. His family and his pecuniary interests. Without a voice in the state, without any public duties, he remains selfish and narrow. His mind is confined to a tiny circle of personal concerns. He has no reason to ever think about the general good.
But give that same person a vote, or a seat on a local council, or a summons for jury duty.
And suddenly everything changes. Now he has to weigh conflicting interests. He has to listen to someone else's perspective. He has to decide what is fair and just, not just what is good for him personally.
The process itself expands the mind.
It lifts the citizen out of their petty self-interest. It forces them to become, in some small way, a public-spirited individual. And that, for Mill, is the ultimate justification for democracy.
So he concludes that the ideally best form of government is one where sovereignty is vested in the entire aggregate of the community. Every citizen must have a voice.
Yes, and not just to protect their rights, which is the usual argument, but to develop their character. It's a moral and intellectual necessity.
However, and this is a huge, huge however, and it's where Mill gets really interesting, he is not a naive cheerleader for democracy. He defends it, but he is absolutely terrified of its dangers.
Deeply terrified.
He spends a huge chunk of the text, probably the most famous part, analyzing the dangers of democracy.
He identifies two great dangers. The first one is fairly standard, something many thinkers had worried about. Incompetence.
A government led by the ignorant or the unskilled.
Right. If the people are ill-informed and they choose leaders who don't know how to run a country, you get disaster. That seems pretty straightforward. We still worry about that today.
Absolutely. But the second danger is the one that really keeps him up at night. He calls it sinister interest, or more specifically, class legislation.
This is his great fear.
Can you define sinister interest for us? It sounds like a supervillain cabal, but I know he means something very specific and sociological.
It does sound dramatic, but it's actually quite a mundane and predictable concept. It's the risk that any ruling group will govern for its own benefit, to the detriment of everyone else.
So in a monarchy,
the king governs for the king and his court. That is his sinister interest. In an aristocracy or an oligarchy, the rich govern for the rich. Their interest is in protecting their wealth and power.
And Mill's great fear is that in a pure, unchecked democracy, the majority will do the exact same thing.
Precisely. The majority, which lyrically, in his time and still largely today, is the working class, the manual laborers, will govern for the working class and plunder the minority.
He's worried they'll just vote themselves the contents of the treasury. Is it that crude?
It could be. Or it could be more subtle. He worried they might enact protectionist trade policies that hurt the overall economy in the long run, but seem to protect their jobs in the short run.
Ooh.
Or they might impose punishingly high taxes on the rich, not for the general good, but simply to subsidize the poor, effectively eating the seed corn of the nation's capital.
Yeah.
He's deeply, deeply concerned that the majority will use the ballot box as a weapon of class warfare.
This is what leads him to make a crucial distinction between true democracy and false democracy. This is a key concept in the text, and it underpins all of his proposed solutions.
It's the pivot point of the entire book, really. A true democracy, Mill argues, is a government that represents all the people. A false democracy is one that represents the majority only.
Explain that difference. How can a democracy not represent the majority?
Well, the problem is when it represents only the majority. He looks at the system as it existed then, and it's largely how the US and UK systems still work today with first-past-the-post voting. In that system, minorities are blotted out in each district.
So if a constituency is 60% liberal and 40% conservative,
the liberal candidate wins the seat, and the 40% of conservative voters get nothing.
Their votes literally achieved nothing. They have no representative. They are silenced.
Exactly. They are, in his words, politically annihilated. Now, imagine if that 60-40 split happens across the whole country. You could theoretically have a parliament where 100% of the seats are held by the Liberal Party, even though they only got 60% of the popular vote.
And that, for Mill, is the false democracy.
That is the tyranny of the majority in action. And for Mill, that is a fatal flaw. It disenfranchises the educated minority, the ideological minority, any minority, and it leaves the state completely vulnerable to that class legislation we talked about. If the minority has no voice, the majority has no check on its power.
So he doesn't just complain about this. He's an engineer at heart. He proposes solutions. This is where we get into the nuts and bolts, the mechanics of his ideal system. And he is obsessed, enthusiastically obsessed, with a plan put forward by a man named Thomas Hare.
He calls it one of the greatest improvements in the theory and practice of government ever made. He is completely convinced by it. It's essentially an early form of proportional representation.
But it's not just parties get percentages of seats based on their vote share, which is how we often think of it now.
Yeah.
How did Hare's plan work specifically? It's quite clever.
It's incredibly clever. The basic concept is that voters shouldn't be limited to their local candidates. If I'm a dedicated conservative living in an overwhelmingly liberal city, my vote for a local conservative candidate is utterly wasted. It's pointless.
Okay.
Hare's plan would allow me to vote for any candidate anywhere in the country. My ballot might list my local guy first, but then I could list a famous intellectual from London as my second choice and a respected politician from Manchester as my third.
So the constituency becomes the entire nation, in a way.
Effectively, yes. The system then uses a quota to determine who wins. Let's use simple numbers. Say you have 100 seats in Parliament and 1 million voters. The quota to win a seat is 10,000 votes.
Okay, that makes sense.
So if a candidate gets 10,000 votes from anywhere, 1,000 from London, 500 from Manchester, a few from a farm in Yorkshire, it doesn't matter. Once they hit that quota, they get a seat. Any surplus votes they get above the quota are then transferred to the voters' second choices.
So if there are scattered intellectuals or scattered members of a specific professional group or just any ideological minority all over the country, they can pool their votes and elect a representative who truly speaks for them.
That is the genius of it, in Mill's eyes. It breaks the stranglehold of local party machines and local mediocrities. Mill loved this because it ensures that virtually every minority group of a sufficient size can elect a representative.
And why is that so important to him? Is it just about fairness?
It's about more than fairness. It's about antagonism.
Antagonism? That sounds negative.
He means it in a positive intellectual sense. Mill believes that truth only emerges from the collision of opposing ideas. He wants the instructed few to be physically present in Parliament to debate the uninstructed many.
He knows they probably won't win the vote. They don't have the numbers.
They won't win, but he wants them there to make the argument. He wants them to stand up and say, wait, this is a bad idea, and here are the 10 economic reasons why.
To force a real debate. To shame the majority into being more reasonable.
Yes, to provide that intellectual friction. He calls it the vital function of antagonism. Without that friction, the majority becomes lazy, complacent, and ultimately tyrannical.
Okay, so that's how people are represented. Now let's talk about who gets to vote in the first place. Mill is famous for arguing for the extension of suffrage.
Yes, he is a true radical for his time on this. He argues for universal participation, everyone should have a voice, and he is explicitly, loudly, and repeatedly in favor of women's suffrage. He considers the exclusion of women from the vote to be an irrational relic of a bygone era.
But, and there is always a but, with Mill when it comes to pure democracy, he has some significant guardrails. He doesn't want unconditional universal suffrage.
No, not at all. He proposes 3 major exclusions from the franchise. First, illiteracy. He says if you cannot read, write, and perform a sum in the rule of 3, basically do simple arithmetic, you should not be allowed to vote.
That sounds incredibly restrictive, especially for the 1860s when literacy wasn't universal.
It does, but he adds a crucial caveat, and this is very important. He says the state has a duty to provide universal education so that every single person can qualify to vote. He isn't saying poor people shouldn't vote. He's saying the state must teach poor people to read so they can vote responsibly.
I see. The exclusion is meant to be temporary and to incentivize the state to do its job. What's the second exclusion?
Dependence. He argues that anyone receiving parish relief, what we would call welfare, should be temporarily excluded from voting.
What's the logic there?
His logic is that if you are living on the public purse, you shouldn't have a direct say in how that purse is managed. He sees it as a direct conflict of interest. You would be voting to give yourself more of other people's money.
And the third?
Taxation. He believes you shouldn't get a vote if you don't pay any direct taxes. Again, he sees voting as managing a joint stock company. If you don't contribute to the fund, you shouldn't get to decide how to spend the fund.
He wants everyone to have some skin in the game.
Exactly. In fact, he suggests there should be a small universal direct tax, even on the very poor, precisely so that everyone can have the right to vote and feel the pinch of government spending.
Okay, so he wants everyone involved, provided they are educated and contributing. But then he drops his most controversial idea, the one that makes modern Democrats squirm in their seats: plural voting.
The graduated suffrage. This is the meritocratic trap we mentioned at the start. This is Mill's ultimate safeguard. He argues that while everyone should have a voice, not everyone's opinion is of equal value.
This is the wiser man principle in action.
Right. He makes a simple analogy. If you are building a bridge, Do you give equal weight to the opinion of a trained engineer and the opinion of someone who knows nothing about bridges? Of course not. You defer to the expert. He says politics, which is far more complex than building a bridge, should be the same. The educated judgment is worth more than the ignorant judgment.
So how does he propose to put this into practice? Does he just give rich people more votes?
No, and he is very, very firm on that. He absolutely hates the idea of property qualifications for voting. He thinks a rich fool is even more dangerous than a poor fool because the rich fool has more power to do damage. His system is based on education and occupation, not wealth.
So explain the mechanics. How would this work?
He proposes a system where every literate, tax-paying citizen gets one vote as a baseline. But those with proven superior intelligence or experience would get 2 or 3 or maybe more votes.
How do you prove that?
Several ways.
Yeah.
If you have a university degree or are a member of a learned profession like a doctor or a lawyer, you automatically get extra votes. If you are a banker, a merchant, or even a skilled foreman who supervises others, your experience grants you extra votes.
And what if you don't have a fancy degree or job?
You can take a voluntary public examination. If you can pass a test showing you have a solid understanding of history, civics, and political economy, you get the extra votes, regardless of your background.
So the goal here is to balance the numbers.
Yes. To prevent the less educated majority from simply outvoting the educated minority on complex matters that require specialized knowledge. He wants to give the weight of intelligence a chance to counteract the sheer force of numbers. It's an attempt to engineer a safety valve against ignorant populism.
It's a fascinating, if deeply uncomfortable, idea today. Now, there is one more mechanic in this section that really surprised me because it runs so contrary to everything we believe now. Mill is against the secret ballot.
He wants public voting. This is one area where history has gone completely the other way. We considered the secret ballot to be a sacred cornerstone of a free and fair election. Mill saw it as a cornerstone of civic selfishness.
Walk us through his logic on this. It seems so backwards. Why would he want me to have to shout my vote in the town square?
He starts from a different premise. He argues that your vote is a public trust, not a private right.
What's the difference?
A right is something you can use for your own benefit. Your right to property, for instance. A trust is something you hold on behalf of others. When I cast my vote, I am exercising power over you. I am helping to decide the laws that you have to live under. Therefore, I should be publicly accountable to you for how I use that power.
So he thinks the secrecy of the ballot booth breeds corruption and selfishness.
He is convinced of it. He believes that if people vote in secret, they will vote for their own narrow, selfish, sinister interests. They'll vote for the tax cut that helps them personally, or the subsidy that helps their specific business, without regard for the general welfare.
But if they vote in public...
If they vote in public, under the watchful eye of their neighbors, they will be shamed into at least considering the general good. Public opinion acts as a check on pure self-interest.
He has a lot of faith in the power of shame.
He does. He also believed that the era of landlords intimidating their tenants into voting a certain way was mostly over, which might have been a bit optimistic on his part, and that the new, greater danger was the selfishness of the individual voter himself. He wants the voter to have to stand up and be prepared to justify his choice to his community.
Let's move on to part 5, the structure of the government itself. We've elected these representatives using his complex system. Now, what do they actually do? Mill has a very specific and, again, surprising view on the division of labor between the executive and the legislature.
He does. And it boils down to this. A popular assembly, like a Congress or a parliament, is terrible at doing skilled work. They are good at talking, but bad at doing. They shouldn't administer anything. And most radically, they shouldn't even write the laws.
They shouldn't write the laws. That's literally what we think of as their main job description.
Mill says legislation is a highly skilled task. It requires deep knowledge, logical consistency, and a clear view of the whole system. What happens when you have 600 people on a parliamentary floor all trying to amend a bill?
Chaos. People add clauses to please their donors. They strike out key phrases to win a few votes.
You end up with a Frankenstein's monster of a law, a heterogeneous mass of anomalies, I think is his phrase for it.
So you get laws that don't make sense, that contradict other laws, that are full of loopholes.
Exactly. The product is shoddy. So who should write the laws in Mill's utopia?
A special committee.
A legislative commission. A small, permanent body of legal experts and trade administrators. Their full-time job is to draft the laws with care and precision.
And what is Parliament's job then?
Parliament's job is to be the voice of the nation. They can debate the principle of the law, they can critique it, and ultimately they have the final say. They can say yes, no, or this isn't good enough, send it back to the commission for a rewrite.
But they can't get in there with their own pens and start tinkering with the details.
They cannot amend it on the floor and ruin the internal logic of the law. It's like a corporate board of directors versus the engineering team. The board approves or rejects the product launch, but they don't go down to the lab and start soldering the circuit boards themselves.
That's a great analogy. Representative bodies should control and critique, but not administer.
That's the principle.
He also has thoughts on a second chamber. He's not a fan of the hereditary House of Lords, is he?
Not in the form it existed, based on birth and inherited wealth. He thinks that's indefensible nonsense. But he does want a second chamber. He believes in the value of a check on the popular assembly. He wants a chamber of statesmen.
And who gets to be in this exclusive club?
Former judges, former cabinet ministers, former colonial governors, the heads of permanent government departments, people who have already proven their ability in high-level public service.
So it's a chamber of experience, not of privilege.
Precisely. And its function is to be a center of resistance against the temporary corrupting influence of the popular majority. If the lower house gets swept up in a momentary passion and passes something foolish or unjust, the chamber statesman is there to be the adult in the room and say, wait a minute, we've seen this before, it doesn't work.
A place where long-term experience can check short-term impulse.
Exactly that.
Finally, in this section, we have to touch on his view of dependencies and colonies. This is where the whole good despot idea comes full circle and gets very complicated.
It does. It's the part of Mill that is most difficult for modern readers. He makes a sharp distinction between colonies settled by people of the same race like America or Australia, which he says should be self-governing as soon as possible. But for what he calls subject races, like in India, he argues they're not yet ready for representative government.
This is the stage of civilization argument.
Yeah. He argues that for a people in a lower stage of political development, despotism is a legitimate mode of government, provided the end be their improvement.
So the duty of the ruler is to act as a good despot.
Yes, but, and this is the critical part for him, for the sole purpose of training that population for eventual freedom, the goal of the despotism must be to make itself unnecessary.
It's the leading strings theory. You guide a child until it can walk on its own.
Right. But he adds a really interesting and self-critical warning. He says that a free people, like the British, actually make for very bad rulers over subject nations.
Why is that?
Because they don't understand the local context. They govern based on their own prejudices. And often, he says, they hold the subject people in contempt. He's very critical of how free nations govern their dependencies, even while arguing that the dependency itself needs that despotic guidance for a time. It's a deeply conflicted position.
So bringing all these threads together in our final part here, how do we look at this work today? It seems like a massive, intricate exercise in compromise.
It is the ultimate logic of compromise. Mill is a Democrat at heart. He sees the tide of democracy rising in the 19th century, and he believes it is both inevitable and, in principle, good for human character. But he is also an elitist in the intellectual sense. He believes in competence and expertise.
And he sees those two things on a collision course.
He does. So the entire book is his attempt to build a sophisticated canal and lock system. He's trying to channel the powerful floodwaters of democracy so that they power the mill of civilization instead of flooding the entire village.
And that central tension between expertise or technocracy and populism or democracy, I mean, that is the defining political headline of the 21st century.
It's the exact same problem. And that's where you hit the meritocratic trap again. His plural voting scheme makes perfect logical sense to him. Of course, the expert's opinion should count for more, but he himself admits that the idea is supremely odious to the democratic sentiment of equality.
And that's the tragedy of Mill's position, in a way.
It is. The very things he thinks are necessary to save democracy from itself are the things that democracy, by its very nature, hates the most. Inequality of voice, public deference to experts, and institutional checks on the raw will of the majority.
We are still fighting the very same battle Mill was trying to solve. Can you have a government that is both fully representative and fully competent?
And, to go back to his main point, can you have a government that actively educates and improves its citizens, rather than just pandering to their basest instincts for votes? That's the lingering and, I think, unanswered question from this book.
Which brings us to our thought experiment segment. These are scenarios where we take Mill's ideas and push them to the breaking point in our modern world. And a quick disclaimer. These are for entertainment and educational exploration only. We are just exploring the ideas.
Let's do it.
Okay. Experiment number 1. I call it the verified voter system. Imagine a modern implementation of Mill's plural voting, but instead of Victorian exams, we use blockchain and verified digital credentials. Every citizen gets one voting token. That's your baseline.
Okay, one person, one vote.
But if you voluntarily take and pass a rigorous, independently audited, objective exam on civics, economics, and logical reasoning, your wallet gets credited with 3 voting tokens.
So you're rewarded for being informed.
And let's go further. If you have a PhD in a relevant field like political science or economics, or you have distinguished public service, say you were a city manager or a 4-star general, you get 5 tokens.
So we operationalize the wiser man theory using modern tech. No human bias, just verified credentials.
Exactly. So the test for us is, would this system result in better laws, or would it result in a popular revolt?
Well, on one hand, logically, you might get laws that are more fiscally sound, more forward-thinking. You'd have voters who understand compound interest and climate science holding the balance of power on those issues. The quality of public debate might go up.
But the social consequences?
The social consequences would be a nightmare. The one-token class would feel, and in fact would be, explicitly designated as second-class citizens. You would be creating a formal, visible class hierarchy based on test scores and credentials.
And Mill makes this huge assumption that the educated are also benevolent. But in this scenario, what if the 5-token class simply legislates for its own sinister interest?
That's the huge risk. They might vote to cut funding for trade schools and pour it all into universities. They might pass complex financial regulations that benefit their investment portfolios. They might change zoning laws to protect their own property values.
You would just replace the tyranny of the majority with the tyranny of the credentialed.
And the resentment boiling up from the one-token class would likely lead to massive social instability, which defeats Mill's whole purpose of preserving order. It could be explosive.
Okay, that's a good one. Experiment number 2. The glass booth election. We take Mill's argument against the secret ballot and apply it to the internet age. After an election, all voting records are made public and searchable on a secure government website. You can look up your boss, your neighbor, your kid's teacher, your ex.
So total transparency. Mill's argument is this forces people to vote for the public good because they'll be ashamed to publicly support a selfish or foolish position.
Right. So in our modern hyper-connected context, does this lead to higher accountability, or does it lead to something much darker?
I think it leads to paralysis and coercion on a scale Mill could never have imagined. First, you have direct economic coercion.
How so?
If you work for a company that relies on green energy subsidies and your public record shows you voted for the candidate who wants to slash all green energy subsidies, what do you think your boss is going to do? You might find yourself at the top of the next layoff list.
And then there's the social coercion.
The cancellation effect, magnified 1,000 times. If you vote for a candidate who is controversial, but who you believe is necessary for some reason, you risk being ostracized by your social circle, your family. People wouldn't vote for what they genuinely believe is right. They would vote for what is socially safe.
So instead of a courageous, public-spirited vote for the common good, you would get a cowardly, defensive vote for social conformity.
Exactly. Mill absolutely hated conformity, but his public voting idea, when mixed with social media and the internet, might produce the most intensely conformist society in human history. It's a terrifying thought.
It really is. To close us out, let's leave our listeners with one of Mill's most provocative lines. He suggests that a man who does not care how he votes, who has no opinion or is indifferent, has no moral right to vote at all.
A powerful claim.
In our modern era of get out the vote campaigns that prioritize quantity over quality, that just want more bodies in the booth, Mill forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. Is an uninformed or indifferent vote actually a danger to the state?
It's the question we don't like to ask, but Mill forces us to face it. Is a vote a right to be exercised no matter what, or a trust to be earned?
We encourage you to read the full text. There's a link in the description. It's well worth it just to see the beautiful nuances of Hare's plan and Mill's technical definitions of order and progress.
It is absolutely worth the read, a classic for a reason.
Until next time, keep thinking.